Hello, everybody. That's on, is it? Okay. So I'd just like to welcome you all to the Nanotechnology Nanococcola section of Material Week. And just to introduce it, so Nanococcola is part of the i-Nanotool project, which is funded by the EU Life Plus programme. The aim of the seminar is to give information about the current situation on the issue of legislation related to nanomaterials, and also we will be showcasing some new and intelligent applications of nanotechnology. We are recording this seminar for a webinar which will be available in the fall. So when we come to the questions, this microphone will be passed around so that the questions can also be recorded. Just to introduce myself, I'm Gavin Farmer and I work for Carbodian. My responsibility is for business development. Carbodian is a Finnish nanomaterials producer specialized in nanodiamonds, and the main applications for those are in wear-resistant materials and thermally conductive polymers. Like a lot of nanotechnology projects, it's created by scientists, so very much producing a solution. Myself, I'm an engineer coming in from industry, so I bring them a lot of problems for them to solve. Anyway, so we will move on to the first presentation, which is Outi's. And Outi Tunnela is a scientific officer of the Regulatory Advice Help Desk of the European Chemicals Agency, covering several areas of REACH and CLP regulations. So her presentation is entitled Nanomaterials, REACH and CLP, What is Going on the Regulatory Front. So I'll pass the floor to Outi now.
Okay, and first question is, how do I change the slides?
With the little wheel.
With that one, okay. Right, you already, thank you Gavin, you already presented me. Indeed, the ECHA, the European Chemicals Agency, I trust that most of you have heard about the place. We deal with the regulations, the chemicals legislation in the EU, REACH and CLP. In addition, we have the biocides regulation and now also the PIC for the export of hazardous materials or substances. Okay, regarding the European Union approach to nanotechnologies, okay, this applies to any chemicals or should apply to any industry. So it should be safe, both for humans and the environment. Both the competitiveness and the safety aspects should be taken into account in the development of the technologies. And it should be, in that same sense, also responsible, and all this managing should be done in a scientifically sound manner. I trust that everyone knows what the REACH regulation is. Just in case you don't. The acronym comes from Registration, Evaluation, Authorization of Chemicals, and then we have the restriction there as a pass along from the previous legislation also, sort of acting as a sort of a safety net in case the previous three are not enough. Slightly inaccurately, it says that the REACH provisions apply in a tonnage-dependent manner, because the registration indeed apply in a tonnage-dependent manner to a substance manufactured, placed on the market and used as such in mixtures or in articles in some cases. The other, authorization and restriction, they are not tonnage-dependent. So all the actors along the line, manufacturers, importers, downstream users, they have to ensure that they know what they are actually using and placing on the market. this is the, it seems self-evident that this should be the case, but it unfortunately has not been so, and now it is, now this really needs to be tackled, and REACH is a tool for that. The CLP regulation, also something that is very important, actually it's even more important than REACH, if we are quite clear about that, is that the manufacturers, importers, downstream users, they need to classify the hazards of their substances and mixtures before placing them on the market. So everybody needs to know, they need to have information on the chemicals of what is used in the production of new chemicals and what is it that you place on the market. And this all has to be communicated to the customers. What about nanomaterials, substances at nanoscale? Are they covered by REACH and CLP? Yes, they are. I mean, even if not specifically mentioned in the regulations, REACH deals with substances, whatever size, shape or physical form, and the same CLP applies to all substances and mixtures that are hazardous, classified as hazardous. As I said, there are no explicit provisions in either piece of legislation specific for nanomaterials, but that may change in the future. Jukka, after me, he will also talk about the EU definition, but here is, you may have seen the definition of nanomaterials. It's not exactly a binding definition, it's a recommendation by the European Commission from 2011. I'm not going to read through it, but in principle it applies to all nanomaterials or nanoparticles, whether they are natural or manufactured. Then there are these numeric number size distribution curves, and there you have to think about how much of the particles that are present in the production, for instance, are in the nanoscale. This is continued here. The definition refers to the particles, of course, and also to the agglomerates and aggregates that are composed of the particles. There's also an additional requirement about the surface area, but the number size distribution is always primary. With the definition in mind, it has been discussed, can REACH adequately then cope with the nanoparticles, nanomaterials? So, in principle, the general, even if not 100%, view is that all substances can be addressed via REACH. There's only more focus on the implementation, which means from ECHA point of view, we follow the registration dossiers of chemicals. And for the member states, it's more on the enforcement side. So ECHA can enforce in their own way, looking at the registration dossiers in the so-called compliance checks and checking that all the information that is required is there, and whether the information is feasible in the sense that it actually really addresses the that substance in question. The substance evaluation is not done by ECHA, it's done by the member states, but together with ECHA. REACH also needs to be refined. The existing tools, which means in principle Euclid 5, which is the the IT tool for the submitting of registration dossiers, more guidance, and a slight amending of the REACH annexes to specifically address the nanomaterials. The tonnage thresholds. So the registration requirement starts from manufacture of import of a substance above 1 ton or at or above 1 ton per year per company. This has been considered adequate by the Commission. I must admit that it's not considered adequate by all parties involved, but it's all under construction, let's say. Then there's just a link for you about a key paper that clarifies the position of nanomaterials under REACH, and it's a paper of the competent authorities of the member states and the Commission, and it's fairly old already at this point. I mean, from 2008, but still, it's a good place to start if you are interested in further information. Okay, from ECHA point of view, we are looking at the REACH registrations because that's what we receive, so there's not much more we can do. The tonnage thresholds, as said, and the deadlines. The first deadline, registration deadline, was 2010 for those substances which were manufactured, imported above 1,000 tons per year. And also certain, the CMR, the carcinogenic, mutagenic, reprotoxic substances. The second deadline for the over 100,000 tons was in 2013, and the last one covering the rest will be in 2018. So the deadlines were originally set after careful consideration of the requirements in the old legislation, and of course after an impact assessment, the impact on innovation, the costs and required resources. And they were also put in this order so that the small and medium-sized enterprises would have the longest period of time to sort of react. Some of the nanomaterials have already been included in the registration dossiers of the bulk form. This means that the nanomaterials, when the smaller companies come in, they are added in the existing registrations as dossier updates and member registrants. But now for the last registration deadline, there will be more guidance and recommendations that come from the updates and the dossiers that have already been received. REACH information requirements depend on the tonnage, but specific to nanomaterials, there might be more information on the physicochemical properties needed. The read across, looking at the properties of the bulk substance and the nanosubstance, that is difficult. In some cases it's not possible, but it may be possible, but then of course the justification needs to be given there. There also may be a need for looking at the toxicological and ecotoxicological endpoints in a wider scope, including, for instance, toxicokinetics. The ECHA is all the time looking at what's going on in the OECD program on the validation of testing protocols, which Jukka works with. Then we are, of course, everybody is very much aware that all this additional information requires time and money. Of course, how much, that is difficult to assess. When a substance is actually occurring only in the nanoform, There are certain such substances, they have been already tested and registered or covered in the registration before. There are new chemicals coming onto the market all the time, and they of course need to be registered prior to marketing. What have we seen in the registration dossiers? You can see that the date here, by the end of January 2012, there were only 7 substances where the nanomaterial as formula substance had been indicated in the registration dossier. But at ECHA, a group was looking at the registration dossiers, especially looking at substances which were known to cover, in principle, should have covered nanoforms also. They could see that there were registrations which included information on nanomaterials, but the dossier did not indicate the nanomaterial as covered by the dossier. There was also the sort of nano indicator included in the description of the substance, but otherwise there was no other information. There were also dossiers which specifically excluded the nanoforms. 59 registrations had the nanoform mentioned as sort of read across from studies that had actually had testing performed on the nanoform. But unfortunately, from the wording and the information in the dossiers, it could not be concluded that actually the dossier would cover the nanoform. But why all these discrepancies? Why weren't they not given so specifically? Was it because of the absence of detailed guidance? Definitely, because, for instance, well, these all came in the 2010 deadline. At that time, you noticed the Commission recommendation for the definition came in 2011, so it came after the deadline of the first registration. So there was no definition, there was no guidance specific to nanomaterials. And the REACH annexes, they are formulated for bulk substances, and they don't necessarily always one-for-one apply to nanomaterials. There have been problems with the identification of the substance because, well, REACH is based on the proper identification of a substance. There are very few clearly identified nanomaterials there. There was next to no information on surface treatment, which we know is a problem in terms of the nanomaterials. Problem in the sense that the surface treatment can make very big differences between the particles. There was no specific nanospecific identity information. There was no indication whether they were covered, and of course how much of the tonnage that had been registered was specific to the nanoform was not indicated. Then the registration dossiers per substance, they are sent together with companies dealing with the same substance, so the lead registrant is actually the one who is submitting the information. However, the lead registrant might not be the one who is dealing with the nanoforms. So he sends in information, but the member registrant who is actually having the nanoform forgets to add their part and indicate that they are actually dealing with the nanoform. The chemical safety report might in some cases be the only source where you can see that actually nanoforms are covered, because you do need to have specific risk management measures or for the nanoform. The hazard assessment part, okay, it's not possible to systematically link the physicochemical properties and the observed hazard. The materials that have been tested, they have not been characterized properly, or at least whether if they have actually been characterized in the company, they have not indicated this in the dossiers. The methods for testing have not, well, they have not used the standardized methods. Well, you can see the different species, methods of administration, all these toxicological variables, they are not not standardized in the sense that you could draw any specific conclusions out of it. And therefore, the risk assessment is extremely difficult. For exposure assessment, one would need more information on the quantities of nanomaterials and how they are present in different products. Also, we all know that monitoring nanomaterials exposure has been extremely difficult. There have been very few sampling methods and consistent sampling methods, especially to characterize the exposure. In real time, this method development is ongoing. There is not enough information on the environmental compartments or the workers' exposure and how the consumers might be exposed. All this needs to be assessed in the registration dossier, but is not. And of course, we also know that for some nanomaterials, definitely heavy risk management measures are in place. For others, next to none. There is still, the dossiers don't give that information. It's from other kind of experience, that knowledge. So because the regulatory measures, they really require a sound scientific background, that is quite impossible with the information that is available for the time being. Going to CLP shortly. As a CLP expert myself, I can say that classification is the basis for almost everything. So the classification is required to be indicated in the registration dossier. The hazard classification is the trigger for many things. In REACH terms, it is the trigger for the exposure and risk characterization. You require, REACH requires the safety data sheets. But of course, CLP itself, if you have a hazardous substance or mixture, you need to label it appropriately. It's all about communication. And for the classification purposes, the currently used testing methods, they have not been validated for nanomaterials so far. They might not be sensitive enough. So the information required for the registrations that should be used for the classification also, but of course they are not always one-to-one, the criteria for classification and the information requirements under REACH. So how can it be applied to nanomaterials as well as possible? I mean, in principle, okay, looking at the hazards of nanomaterials, of course, nanomaterial as such, it doesn't mean that it's hazardous. But it does mean that that particular substance, then it does exhibit different properties. It shows different phenomena that from the bulk size substance. So you have to consider them. I mean, CLP requires the classification of a substance or mixture in the form or physical state that it's placed on the market. And thus the classification of the nanoform is not necessarily, and probably even, not the same as that of the bulk substance. But you need to know how these physicochemical properties affect the systems, the biological implications of these properties, and that is really critical. Of course, in short term, it is very important to develop these dose metrics that actually allow for the determination of toxicokinetics, as well as the bioavailability, the mode of action of the different nanomaterials. In the slightly longer term, the validated in vitro and in vivo models are needed to predict long-term or chronic effects. The CNL inventory is an inventory where manufacturers and importers of substances as such, or in mixtures, they need to notify the classification and labeling. This is also not tonnage dependent, so anything that is imported, because manufacture is usually bigger quantities, but even the smallest amount that is imported needs to be notified. At the time this was looked at from the perspective of nanomaterials, there were 3.2 million notifications. They were screened at this point of time. There are 6.2 million notifications. Out of the 3.2 million notifications, you had 18 indicated as nanomaterial. I don't think that the 6.2 million has much more. But now there are additional substances which are related to nanomaterials. That is from the assessment from the part of the agency, but not in the notifications themselves. Now, looking quickly at the activities ECHA is doing for nanomaterials under REACH. Of course, we are trying to provide feedback and advice to the future registrants. There are webinars and workshops on nanomaterials to the registrants. There's one in October, workshop, I mean. There's ECHA is working together with the member state authorities, and ECHA has this risk assessment committee, as well as the committee on socioeconomic evaluation. What was it? Socioeconomic committee, whatever. So there's a lot of discussion between the members of these on the safety information regarding nanomaterials. There is the OECD Working Party on Manufactured Nanomaterials, which is extremely active and needs to do a lot of work. And then, of course, we try to educate ourselves as well as spread the word. I'll do it. Nanomaterials Working Group is something that is within ECHA. With the member states, we discuss the scientific and technical questions. Then there has been a group which was looking at the received registrations. So the GARN is not active at this moment, but probably will in the future again. But then outside ECHA, there's the CASC Nano, the nanomaterials working group under the competent authorities. That is sort of the previous slide showed you the nanomaterials working group in ECHA, which is about scientific issues, and then the CASC Nano is more about the policy issues. The EU definition of nanomaterial, it's actually under revision. There is a Commission inter-service consultation group which has prepared a couple of reports, and we're waiting. Actually, it was supposed to come this week, I think. The last report giving their view on whether it needs to be revised and in what way. So we'll see if something happens to the definition still later this year. There is also, because the CLP regulation is the implementation of the United Nations globally harmonized system of classification, then under the UNGHS there is a group looking at the classification of nanomaterials. So eventually probably there will come something out of there to see whether something needs to be done and what it is that needs to be done for the criteria of classification regarding nanomaterials. And what do we do in ECHA? As I already mentioned, the modification of guidance documents. Something has already been done regarding the information requirements. There's still going to be more evaluation of the dossiers. There are substances evaluated by the member states. For example, these substances, silicon dioxide, silver and titanium dioxide, all of them big quantity substances. And there are also discussions between ECHA and the US EPA. There's the Commission wishes to have an inventory of the nanomaterials, and that's ongoing, the scanning of the registration dossiers, etc. That also is needed to modify the Euclid to be more easy to use for those who are registering nanomaterials. So I guess we still expect to have between 50 to 60 registration dossiers with information on nanomaterials, and these will be sent to the Commission's Joint Research Center, where they will assess how this information is included in the registration dossiers and what can be done with that information. And that was it. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Outi? I have a microphone will come.
Andreas Dietz is my name. I have no idea about the dimension of these markets. Are in the dimension of tons or kilograms, and more important, is it a growing market or more or less decreasing? I remember, I think 2 or 3 years ago, when there was a hype about the nanotubes, but last year the company Bayer cancelled the production of nanotubes because there's no market. Is it growing or a decreasing market?
I'm sure there are more experienced people on that side, but I would be surprised if there's no market for carbon nanotubes. But let's say that, I think, is a very wide question, in the sense you have nanoform substances which are produced in great quantities, and you have others which are produced in very, very small quantities. So that, I mean, one factory may produce something by, putting them into huge sacks of stuff, sending out, and another one is very careful to preserve every single little molecule they get, because it's extremely expensive. The range is very big, and I would think that the small ones are the ones that are the increasing potential. But you have a nano substance such as cerium oxide, which is used in the UK as a fuel additive. It has a growing market. You have the carbon, you have titanium oxide almost everywhere nowadays. You have the silica. So it's a very varying market. Yes. Jukka.
I think I can test now my mic. First of all, thanks for the good presentation. It made my life easier in my presentation, first of all. But I think the physical properties of the substance you are registering and what you are assessing, I think those are the crucial importance. And those are the features which actually the company developing already in an innovation phase of that material, they should know the best. And these physical features they have on their material are extremely important also to guide further information requirements and also direct testing. In a way, this basic knowledge of whether it releases, for example, if it's a metal material, whether it releases the ions in various environments or in human body, that should enable us to make good decision which kind of testing is actually needed for that material in a way, but it also helps to understand the final toxicological results. So that's the key point. And in REACH, where the industry should know, that's a good starting point, because this is very important and it can be savings to gain the information from that material if you really think what is sensible to test further on. But about the carbon nanotubes, I think in that particular case, this is half rumor, half true perhaps, but I can be very free here. And I think it was that the occupational protective measures they should have been taken at the plant were becoming so expensive that at the moment the markets for that particular carbon nanotubes were not adequate to fulfill the requirements. In a way, the money speaks there.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Outi. If nobody has any further questions, I shall introduce the next speaker.
Release me.
Just pick a small number of the many achievements of Dr. Jukka Ahtiainen. He's a senior research scientist at the Finnish Safety and Chemicals Agency, which is the main competent authority within Finland for the chemical safety covering REACH and CLP. He has a long background in this kind of materials and safety analysis, including nanomaterials, going back many years. And he is currently the national coordinator of an EU-funded project called NanoREACH, which is a research project into exactly this issue. So we'll now pass over to Dr. Ahtiainen to give his presentation.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you for the organizers inviting me here. And I will not just give the same issues as Outi gave. I will mention the same issues, but I try to look them also from the angle of competent authority for Finland. What are the problems? But I also take more understanding view towards industry in a way. I have sympathy for some cases with industry because they must face difficulties to fulfill the requirements of the regulations. So, and I see this is a discussion what we are also having in this NanoREACH project, which I come to the end. Hence, and by the way, I can speak quite freely because actually at the moment I'm working off-duty from TUKES, and I'm actually having a contract with the OECD developing just tools for nanomaterial safety. So I'm not competent authority at the moment, so to make sure. So what I'm going to talk is first the regulations, but as I try to use a different angle looking those. The EU chemicals and product legislation. Of course, I can't escape the EU recommendation for definition of nanomaterials. And of course, I will give my view on REACH and CLP and possible changes, what are really needed there. And cosmetics and other regulations do have already provisions regards nanomaterials. And then there are a lot of national activities, at least in Europe, regards to nanomaterial safety and regulations. Those are the regulation issues, so 3 parts. Then the second part are the tools. And this is maybe the less political part, if there can be any less political when you're talking about nanomaterials. I will look into the work of the OECD in Working Party of Manufactured Nanomaterials and what they have done. They had done a systematic testing of some selected 13 nanomaterials, and then I look the test method applicability. As we heard, we still don't have all the standardized methods looking for nanomaterial, and what are really the priority needs there. And then we have this, well, I will use just NM for nanomaterial, and then we have a case. And in the case of NanoRec research project, which is a large, huge, I would use the word huge, European research project with over 60 partners and 14 countries. But our part is to bring the nanocellulose as bio-based nanomaterial to this European project, and that's what is our main task in that project. Of course, it's an interest of Finland, but it's also an interest of Sweden. And we are in this together, more or less. So those are the 3 parts. And I will probably use the most of my time in the tools part. So regulations. As we heard, the players are, at least for my view, it's the competent authorities subgroup of member state competent authorities under the group Caracal, which is the competent authorities for REACH and CLP actually. And then we have a European Chemicals Agency. As we heard, it has a working group on nanomaterials, and then the other group, which is now more dorming. And then what is the recent work done? As I said, I can't escape the EU definition, and I will give my view on that. And then what would be my proposals where we have the needs to immediately change something, perhaps in legislation or in guidance. And of course, it's very important that at least that we have the ECHA technical guidance already regards to nanomaterials. There are already changes in the guidance given to the registrants. And then I will review some of the member states' activities, and because there have been also some very wild proposals from certain NGOs or member states that maybe we shouldn't try to put nano things to the REACH or CLP. We should have a wholly separate nano legislation covering medicals, chemicals, everything. There have been such proposals also, which could be quite, in a way, compact and then have references to other pieces of legislation, but that's maybe not the realistic way to go. Okay, the definition, which is actually, it's a nightmare to industry, it's a nightmare to regulators, but it's a moneymaker to lawyers and all this part of the world. So, because there's a lot of things which you can interpret different ways. But anyway, as we heard, hopefully it will be reviewed this year, and I'm looking forward really for that report, what is coming from the Commission. Let's see. But Commission has problems at the moment to deliver in a way, because we have a new Commission, and things, for example, in the DG Enterprise, they are in turmoil and changing. Let's see what happens. So we already heard that I think this is based also in partly to the ISO, International Organization of Standardization definition. So in practice, we are talking about 1 to 100 nanometers, where external or internal dimensions are in there. And then there are some extra things and criteria, whether it's nanomaterial or not. But how does this, for example, in our case, how it fits to the nanocellulose? Well, if you think about nanocellulose, which is fibrils taking out of the cellulose, so those fibrils are the primary particles in that sense, and they are about 30 nanometers thick, but very long and flexible too. But still, if you are taking one of those as a primary particle, then it contains over 50% particle number size distribution in your material. So our industry agrees that it is nanomaterial. The nanofibril cellulose is nanomaterial. So it fits in a way, and everybody understands that. So then we go to the ECHA guidance to the nanomaterial registration. Of course, as we heard, the substance identification is one of the keys. And we had a lot of discussion regards the carbon, because, and I remember in the early days of REACH, actually carbon was exempted from registration. There is an Annex 4, if I remember correctly, where are substances which you don't need to register. But because having the carbon nanotubes, having the graphene, having the fullerenes, it was taken out of that annex. So, in this case, for example, the fullerenes and the carbon nanotubes, they already had separate CAS number, for example, so they were registered separately. And that's another discussion, but it's very important, the substance ID. And then the information required, as we heard, the questions are, should we ask more information for nanomaterials than we ask for bulk chemicals? Yes, indeed. As I said in my comment or question, that the physical properties, that's the key and basis for further decisions very often. And the registrant, the industry, should know these, because that's why they are making their material. So maybe it's only a problem of communication there, that they should adequately address the physical properties, which they already have the information. And of course, we heard already that it's a bit hard to use this kind of read across from the bulk substance to the nanomaterial, whether the effects will be same or the different. And the safety assessment has also problems. So back to the substance ID. What to register? It's really different, important that you know that the dossier you have for the safety assessment, it's about really the key, that if it's covering the nanomaterial, that the data is from that nanomaterial. And it's really important also for data sharing, because this should be the idea of REACH, that there is maybe a lead registrant, and then member registrants will come with the additional information if they have a nano. In a way, that leads all this data sharing also, the substance ID. And it's still a discussion that whether the size and the form of your substance, is it really an identifier that is the different substance, or is it a characterizer of that particular substance? And this is still under the discussion, and at the moment when we don't have it in fixed answer, we are going case by case in this ECHA working group with the member states to make the decisions. And then if you think about the nanocellulose and the coated nanocellulose, and this is interesting because now the bleached pulp out of which nanocellulose is manufactured mechanically, it's exempted from registration. It's in Annex 4. So everything fine, but if all the nanomaterials would be treated more heavily in regulations, that for example, all the nanomaterials should be registered, then nanocellulose would be obligated to register it. But then if nanofibril cellulose is the case, what to register? Because REACH doesn't at the moment cover polymers. You can't register a polymer, which nanocellulose is, and there is no sense register the monomer, the sugar. It doesn't help anything. So it's an interesting and complicated thing what will happen to nanocellular depending where the regulation goes, and that's why it's quite interesting. Okay, as I said, it's also the tonnage level is the question. Maybe we should have lower tonnage levels for the nanomaterials. That's still under discussion. And as we heard, most of the endpoints are relevant, but are there nanomaterial specific or more relevant endpoints? There are, as we heard, might be. But as I said already many times, the physical characterization is definitely an important part, and there new endpoints are needed, like the surface activity, zeta potential, such things. And there are tools becoming, and we have to have those tools to address these new endpoints. As we heard, I don't have to go here very deeply. There's a lot of problems in safety assessments, and especially the use alternative metrics. Maybe it shouldn't be actually the mass anymore. Should it be the surface area, particle number, or something else to address the effects? And we are still weak in the scientific justification using non-testing approaches. In vitro test even, the link between in vivo and in vitro is still weak. That should be, and then going to the non-testing, I mean in silico using read across and such things, we are still not yet there. Okay, but in principle, REACH should cover all forms of the substance. And we discussed this already quite a lot. And I think it should, I think for me, it seems that the dossier within dossier having the nano-specific part would be maybe the sensible way to go. But there should be a separate assessment of those nanoforms. And it could be linked to the main dossier. And maybe, of course, there will be cases for new substances which are not phasing substances. And this is the proposal, as I said, some people have proposed that should we have a different, totally separate nano legislation. But I don't have to say about this any much more, but we have had an impact assessment, for example, for how to change REACH annexes, the data requirements mainly. And it's still in the production of the report inside the Commission, this impact assessment, if we would change the REACH annexes and which direction should we ask more information or less information for nanomaterials. But I think that's the key point what we should do now very soon, that we should actually add and revise the REACH annexes regards to data requirements. We already had a proposal from DG Environment, which was an unofficial proposal, and it supported at least 10 member states. And I read between the lines that ECHA would welcome such a proposal also, because they were developing it together with these 10 member states. And at least it would nail down some things, because it's also important for industry to know a little bit beforehand where we are heading, because it makes it safer, the environment, to know something at least, because we are in the open air regards to that. So I hope that there will be proposal to change or improve the REACH annexes regards to nanomaterial. Pardon?
I was just saying that it's legally binding. I mean, the annexes are still legal text.
Okay, good. And I don't have to say too much about the labeling and registers, but we have to remember that the cosmetics regulation has already that you have to mention in your product, if the ingredient is nanomaterial, you have to put in parentheses nano. So at least there is already a labeling in cosmetics and novel foods. And then the registers, there are proposals and already regulations in those France, Belgium, Denmark as a natural laws on nanomaterial product registers. So there is a lot of challenges also regards to labeling, because not all nanomaterials are bad or good. So in a way, it's a matter of communication. You have to be very clear and careful with that. But then the OECD tools, I don't go all the possible work they have done or we have done in the working party, but I think I highlight the safety testing of these 13 nanomaterials and the implications to the test guidelines and testing of nanomaterials. So 13 nanomaterials were tested, and it was based on voluntary contribution from member countries. OECD has member countries, EU has member states, that's important, and from industry. And I think the important things at the moment are how to organize this data and how to make it public. And I think even more priority is how to make our testing tools better towards nanomaterials. But these are the materials tested on the left-hand side, and then there were lead sponsors, co-sponsors, and contributors. We don't have to go in it. But here, for example, on the right-hand side, you have a lot of relevant physical properties and material characterization things which should be looked upon nanomaterials. And something similar, you should pick up some of those at least in the REACH information requirements in the future annexes of REACH. So we don't have to go through these. There's a lot of for environmental fate. Most of are also relevant for any chemical, for environmental toxicology, mammalian toxicology, and material safety. But a lot of things were done. But why do we develop these tools under the OECD? Because this is very important also for all chemicals, that if you use OECD test guideline to testing your material, nanomaterial or chemical, and you use it good way using good laboratory practice, that brings you to the mutual acceptance of data. So all the OECD countries should accept that data without asking new testing. And this is for saving animals, but it's also saving costs of testing. And we should keep this principle and way of working. And that's why, for example, under the REACH or linked to the REACH, we have our EU test method regulation, which are actually the methods there, and I'm very happy that they are copies from the OECD original test guidelines. So it also fits in with the mutual acceptance of data principle. And I think we should go on with that in a way, because it's really savings in testing, and that's why this tool work is important. Okay, as I said, there are non-event physical properties, but of course, most of the biological endpoints are already relevant. Whether the water flea, Daphnia, has babies or not, whether it's a chemical or whether it's a nanomaterial, if its cause is that it can't reproduce, it's relevant, of course. And maybe in some of the mammalian tests, for example, for inhalation toxicity, there might be some other things in lungs you should look more carefully. But mainly, they are relevant, the test methods. But the PhysChem, there's a lot of wish list which should be looked to help to understand and guide the testing of nanomaterials. Of course, the dosing is the key. How you mix your how you expose your animals to nanomaterials so that it's relevant. For example, at the moment for the OECD, I'm taking perhaps not the lead, but I'm assisting an expert group developing a guidance how to address the bioaccumulation of nanomaterials into fish and via the dietary exposure. So actually what the fish are eating. And it's nice to work with these professors with long experience really testing with fish, because for example when they were testing carbon nanotubes, you could how to mix the nanotubes to your fish food. You could make pellets out of homogenized mixture of carbon nanotubes, but they got so tough, so hard that the fish couldn't eat them because of the carbon nanotubes in it. So how to circumvent this kind of problems? So it's such things we are struggling in making that guidance, for example. So sometimes lab work is really interesting. But, and I think this is the important question, that if we have a separate guidance document, how to use this, for example, this bioaccumulation test guideline, is this still under the MAD, which is important. But I think here, as I say in the second bullet, that if this guidance, nanomaterial specific guidance, can be seen as a refinement of the test guideline, what we have already, I think we are under the MAD, and that's the only feasible way working. We shouldn't start making new test guidelines for nanomaterials. Because then already, if the coating changes the properties, maybe it's an endless road. We can't get anywhere if we would choose that. But should the guidance be for similar matrices, like soil testing, sediment testing in an environmental area, or should the guidance be, for example, metals, metal oxides, and different things? That's a question, whether it's in a way matrix. Similarly to the mammal testing, of course, for example, in the case of inhalation testing, there will be minor changes in test guideline that it allows the testing of nanomaterial. Then there will be more revisions perhaps in the existing guidance documents, and then probably there is a need for new guidance document for nanomaterial testing in inhalation toxicity tests. And those are under the development. And then coming back to the case which I already reflected a bit in relation to the nanocellulose in previous parts. So actually this originated from Netherlands mostly, and I think in the red triangle accelerating the regulatory process, that was the driving horse, because we had this huge OECD program, but nothing seemed to come out of it in a way, and it's still, I'm not so, you said that OECD works hard and efficiently. I'm not sure about the efficiently. Even though I'm having a contract with the OECD, I can tell this. But anyway, the point is to have scientific answers to the regulatory issues, because it's important to have credible regulatory context. It's important for everyone. It's for regulators, it's for industry. And still keeping the pace with the innovation. I think that's the important point. So it's a huge project, as I say, about over 60 partners at the moment and 14 countries. And it's really huge. And they are already talking about the second phase of NanoRec project. I think there are different aims, but I think one of the biggest aims is the collaboration among authorities and industry, in a way, to have this safe by design idea in it. Because already in the early phases of innovation, the safety issue should be there. Because it's not worth of investing such an innovation or application or product in the future if it doesn't pay back. And in a way, this was something I was really missing today, perhaps in the morning session, that this link of safety, and here I read safety also taking into account socio-ethical things. It should be really sustainable in a broad sense. And that should be, and here we try to talk about these things in this project. Of course, yes, I'm exactly in time. To provide tools for risk assessment. It also have ideas to make some kind of tools for looking safety as you are producing here in KETEK project. And I think it will be, when they get more in NanoRec, to really to link those activities and look how they look. Of course, to have testing strategies. It's in idea of the OECD also, it's an idea of ECHA, how to make testing strategies, it's idea in this project. And as I said, those testing strategies should be based on the basic PhysChem data and then go from there, from PhysChem features of your material to the testing and then finally understanding the results. Something should be done there. But as I said, the discussion with industry is very important. And of course, here are the work packages. We don't have to go through them, but there is this regulatory part, and then there is actual testing, and then there are life cycle issues and value chain issues, and all this possible, and it's a lot. But we have our own national case, as I said, which is the nanocellulose. And what we have been doing, that our part, our national part, is coordinated by our agency, TUKES. And of course, we have all the partners. We have the industry mainly paying the work we do, and we are very grateful for that. And we have the research, which is our Finnish Institute of Occupational Health, which are one of the leading labs in the world in the nanosafety. And then we have a regulator, me and Elina at TUKES. So, and we are very pleased to have UPM Corporation and Stora Enso as industry partners. As I said, they are paying most of the work we are doing. And we have very close cooperation. Every month or twice a month we have a teleconference with all the partners, and we look the results, how it looks, and actually all the toxicological studies are done at Finnish Institute of Occupational Health, and the mice have already dead and the samples have taken, and I can tell it looks very promising, that we don't see any real relevant effects, at least in immunotoxicity or genotoxicity effects. And it's very important to do the right test in a way. And regards to genotox, as we heard already in Outi's presentation, that the in vitro test we normally use bacterial cell like an Ames test. It's not at all suitable for nanomaterials. It's no sense making that at all for nanomaterials. So you have to really think what you do. And we use different cell lines, for example, for genotoxicity. And it's also what we are trying to develop here is the link between in vivo mice testing and in vitro cell testing, because we are measuring exactly the same endpoints from the lungs of the mice than we are doing in the cell line testing. So in a way, it gives also that knowledge for the further OECD work for development of in vitro tests. And we are under the very high pressure from other partners in Europe that we should give nanocellulose as an example and a case of value chain studies. I was in a phone last week many times because they were asking, couldn't you provide, couldn't your industry, but it's up to the industry, of course, to make decisions. And our industry doesn't say that it's not important, but the problem is also with nanocellulose that we have ideas of the applications and products, but they are not yet there in the market. It's a bit hard to make an imaginary value chain, and it's no use to making it because we are very close to make that value chain, but not yet there. And it's hard to keep the Europeans that, yeah, we are not forgetting it, we are coming there, but not yet, we don't have it. And I think it's not up for the regulator to say that we should go there if there is not the whole value chain. It's up to the industry. And I'm also there, I'm the middleman in a way, trying to keep the commission that, yeah, we are not forgetting, we are doing it, and then try to keep industry still interested, that it's worth of doing that. But I think for our industry, it has been very important that in this project, they are now with the nanocellulose in the same table with all the regulators from at least these 14 countries, discussing directly in those meetings, not just through Finnish competent authority. In a way, it's an example how industry can really come to the dialogue with the regulators and have an effect, hopefully. For example, there was a proposal in the REACH annexes that there was a proposal that this Annex 4, where you have the exempted materials from registration, it shouldn't apply if it's a nanoform. But in the latest proposal, it's not there. So maybe there has been some lobbying, maybe not, I don't know. But it's very important also for industry what happens with the regulation. I think with that I gained my view. As I said, it's very personal view. It's not the view of a competent authority, perhaps orally, but at least that's what I see important in regards to the regulations and nanomaterials. Thanks.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions?
Andreas Yazdanyan, ECHA Technologies. I have a mic, this should be working.
Please.
My question relates to the testing guidelines, and maybe you can help me out not to get discouraged. In the years 2005-06, I used to work for a nanomaterials maker, and we were very cooperative with research at universities and various regulatory agencies, the US OSHA and EPA. And I take it from your presentation that the guidelines are still under construction. Is that correct?
Yeah, there is OECD has published, I think the best guidance is there is a guidance on sample preparation and dosimetry, which is published, I think the updated version 2012. That's the latest, how to use existing test guidelines when you are testing nanos.
Okay. Well, you know, the question is because back then, which is now about 7-8 years ago, and these questions were still under construction back then, we would provide generously samples to universities, and very paradoxical and ambiguous results would come out. You know, I mean, the one university would put our materials in a petri dish with nerve cells and tell us, oh, it's toxic. And the other place would put them with daphnias and fish and would say, well, it behaves just like the bulk. So when do you expect these guidelines to actually reach maturity?
Well, that's a good question. And for example, at the moment, there is one, for example, regards to the daphnias and ecotoxicity. US is leading an activity where they are developing guidance documents for aquatic testing, water testing, for using fish, daphnia, what have you, in the water phase. And I'm expecting that if it's going to be a guidance document, they should be able to have it in 3 years. And maybe it's the same with, for example, looking at bioaccumulation by dietary route in fish, maybe 3 years. But it's species of different, but at the moment, unfortunately, it's the best document is the sample preparation and dosimetry document, the guidance on that, which is published 2012 by OECD. There you can look the test guidelines and what you should do. That's the best knowledge published by the OECD. Unfortunately, it's not exhaustive. It's not enough. But I see. But the problem is that some kind of harmonization is better than nothing, as you describe what was done with your material in different labs. It's totally, there is no harmonization at all.
It's out of control.
Yeah, out of control. And that was a bit of a problem with the OECD testing also, I'm sorry to say.
Do we have any other questions? If not, I'd like to ask one. So from a practical point of view, we got the impression from the statistics in Outi's presentation that perhaps industry is a little bit behind in terms of the number of registrations it's made and dossiers it's made compared to what we would presume is out there. And normal industry reaction to this kind of regulatory issue is to use consultants who understand very well the regulations to guide them through it, and then obviously there's a lot of lab work needed. So do you think there's enough capacity in existence to implement this as everything starts to catch up?
I think I must say that the ball is quite a lot in Europe, at least in ECHA. they should do the capacity building, which they are doing. They are organizing, as we heard, the workshops and such. But of course, there might be an area for markets for consultants to do the registrants for things for nanos. But in a way, yeah. But it's a bit difficult situation in a way, because we are getting wiser and wiser gradually. For example, regards to the metals, regards to the ion release from nanomaterials. We already know that actually the bulk, the salt form of solution of the bulk is the worst case. For example, in aquatic tests. There you can really do the read across. If you have, for example, a zinc nanomaterial and you have a zinc chloride solution, the zinc chloride, it will be much more toxic than the zinc nanoparticles. So there you can do a worst case read across towards the. So this is a small piece of information, and I think it's very important that we have ECHA who combines all these pieces of information and put it to somewhere to make better guidance for registrants, because it should be improved every year, perhaps, the guidance, because we are getting wiser every year. And that's why they have the working group, I hope, also for nanos, not just to help the registrants case by case, but eventually developing some kind of guidance for registrants, what to do. I think that's the important.
And it's good that we're getting wiser every year anyway. Thank you very much.
Otherwise, the other way around would be a little bit.
You asked about the capacity of laboratories, for instance. I mean, that's another story then, because you would have to have appropriate, say, GLP compliant laboratories, etc., and they should be all over the world. That's another story then.
Okay. Thank you very much.